Welcome back, everyone, to the second episode 3 of Blue Collar, White Collar. Yes, that's right, you heard correctly. This is the second time we'll be recording this episode because last time I had an audio error. Unfortunately, none of my audio got recorded. Oh no, Nicholas!
Just kidding.
Anyway, I'm Kieran, and with me again, as always, is my co-host, Nicholas Wheeler-Hughes. Say hi, Nick.
Hi, Nick.
Damn you.
Well, I'm interested how this conversation goes because, I'm almost thinking of the first one as a warm up, and I felt like there were certain ideas that I was almost thinking through for the first time as I was saying them. So I feel like I have a clear idea of what I want to say in this second go around. And I also feel, we're recording this on the evening of October 25th. So a week and a half out from the election. And I just feel like in this last week, the election fervor has really set in where every conversation I have now is about the American election. It's on everyone's minds because the results were so consequential. And it just feels like even in the last week, Trump has been talking about the enemy within. That's a very recent development. And a lot of his former aides are calling him a fascist, and it just feels like it's gone to this whole other level. And it's crazy.
October surprise season. Yeah, I know what you mean because even at my work, you work in the political environment, so it's kind of normal that you guys talk about that kind of thing. My work is people talk about hockey. People they don't. Yet, what are people talking about? Not exclusively, but a lot more often, they're talking about the American election. I will give a shout out to Susan Holt. I believe that's her name. I apologize if I'm wrong. The last time we recorded this, we had an election coming up here in New Brunswick. There has since been an election, and the Liberals will be taking government in New Brunswick for the next 4 years at least, since they have a majority. So, congratulations, Susan. You ran a better campaign than your opponent, and my dad is probably super happy right now. So he's met her personally. She did a lot of work at the university through the university, I believe. And yet we still don't have an answer on the BC election, which was a week before the New Brunswick election.
Well, we knew we had to wait till tomorrow.
Yeah. Actually, I don't think they're recounting till Sunday.
Let's focus up.
I just wanted to send that out there because a lot of people can be there's a lot of animosity around left-right divides, and where I consider myself mostly center-right, the Liberal Party is typically a center-left party, and they won. I wanted to be generous and wish them congratulations on their victory.
In the spirit of the podcast, right?
Exactly. That's what we do here.
Well, all want the best. Just have different ways of thinking about what's best.
Well, not everyone. Some people are evil, malicious sons of bitches, as we talked about earlier.
Okay, so what are we talking about today?
Yeah, so again, we'll be talking about the Republicans and the Republican Party and, of course, Donald Trump, since he's currently leading it. This is going to be kind of an awkward conversation, as you mentioned. How are we going to talk about this? We already did talk about this, so I feel like we're going to retread some ground that we already covered. It's going to be a little awkward. So I'll just start out by saying...
All good. It's all good, man.
Yeah, it's my fault, so I feel like kind of an idiot. I'll just start out by saying that as we get closer to the election, it seems like... I don't know. I'm on the fence about changing my prediction about who's going to win. I'm not sure why. I feel like it's a lot closer and is getting a lot closer. Maybe I think it's because Kamala, where she was so ascendant when she first came out of the gate, that and this, she's really slowed down. I wouldn't even say she's slowed down. I just say that I think the race has gotten more settled in. But yeah, onto the Republican Party. What do you want to talk about first? Do you want to talk about foreign policy, domestic policy, cultural matters, or the future potential president of the United States himself.
I'd like to go with option E, none of the above.
Well, thanks for joining us for Blue Collar, White Collar episode 3, everyone.
I think we should talk about how we got here. It feels like we need to put this in context before we start talking about individual policies or, relevance in this cultural moment. Because I just do think that the Republican Party has fundamentally changed from what it was prior to, Trump becoming its head. And to think about how the Republican Party of 2014, 2015, the Republican Party of John McCain and Mitt Romney, the Republican Party of the Cheneys is gone, right? And anyone who was part of that Republican Party is not only not active in it, but is expelled and endorsing Kamala, right?
Or they've converted.
Or they've converted. That's right. There's the Lindsey Grahams, people who, exactly, recognized that you were either going to get on board the Trump train or, you're out. So I do think that you make a good point. A lot of those people, a few of those people, I would actually say that they're a vast minority of people who have really, been able to stick around and stay because there are still some old school Republicans who are elected in Congress, but I feel like they're not the kind of heads of the party in any way. They're not on TV. I really do feel as though the most powerful people in the Republican Party are all the hardcore MAGA, Trump all the way people. And it's incredible to me how one man has completely changed a political party as big as the Republican Party. And yet here we are with, King Donald Trump, the party boss.
Yeah, I mean, it shows you the level of power that he has, and you're right that there's some people who've managed to skate by, especially senators that have had elections in times that lined up where Trump wasn't as, important in the news cycle, ones who aren't mainstream, not, ones that are very quiet, don't do a lot of press. They've just, they'll side with him when they need to, but they might not have gone full MAGA, and they've been able to skate by. No one knows their names because that's why they managed to skate by, because if people knew who they were, people in their states know who they are, but us in the international scene, and people who only focus on the federal election itself don't really notice those people. Everyone else has been co-opted or assimilated, to use some Star Trek jargon, to the Trump chain of things. And in some ways, I think that's a good thing, because I actually don't like some of the aspects of that previous Republican Party. You mentioned the Cheneys. I think the Cheneys are some of the worst people that the Republican Party ever had. Dick Cheney, in my worldview, is a war criminal, so I don't see them being flaunted as a good thing. I think it's one of the worst things Kamala is doing these days, is bringing out the Cheneys. No one likes the Cheneys.
I understand why she's doing it, but I think that, to your point, I'm not at all agreeing that the Cheneys are better Republicans or good Republicans. Dick Cheney is a war criminal, or at least responsible for, one, if not two, unnecessary wars. I'm not advocating for that. I'm just saying that the type of politics that the Cheneys and the Bushes and the
It keeps happening. Stop doing that, Discord.
The Canes, their type of politics is a thing of the past, right? It does not work anymore, because it is not modern. Modern politics is all about attention. It's all about making noise. It's all about being pretty extreme in a lot of cases. And that was not the type of politics that was done by, even Mitt Romney, who was the last, believe it or not, the Republican Party's last candidate, right, for president, because Trump has now been 3 times in a row the Republican Party's candidate for president. But in 2012, you didn't see Mitt Romney making radical claims, trying to use hate as a way to divide people. He was just a business guy who wanted to run America as a business. And, I think that he, wouldn't have been my top choice, but I think he, was still a good man who wanted to do what he thought was best for the country. And it just feels like Trump is not about what's best for the country. It's really about doing what's best for him. And the Republican Party has become a vehicle for Trump's own ambitions.
I mean, I wouldn't completely agree with your description of Mitt Romney. Being as religiously inclined as he is, he had cultural ideas that actually are less progressive than Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the first person to be elected president that was in favor of gay marriage. A lot of people don't like accepting that fact, but when Barack Obama was elected, he opposed gay marriage. Donald Trump came in and he'd already said, no, that's fine by me. So that was the thing that weirdly enough, a lot of people don't like to admit that Donald Trump, in certain aspects, not necessarily his personality, is more moderate. He is definitely more pro-choice than most of the Republicans that were on the stage with him during the primary. I guess he wasn't on the stage because he avoided debating. Yes, he's the person who installed the Supreme Court justices who overturned Roe v. Wade, but if you're to personally ask him, you honestly think a man that, like him, never had mistresses get abortions? Like, come on. So there's certain aspects like that he is actually more moderate on policy, and the Republican Party's actually shifted. If you cut Donald Trump out of the picture, in a way that I actually prefer, because it is more populist and less elitist, and it's also far more anti-war than it was when I was growing up. Like, Republicans were the party of war, Democrats were the party of peace, and Donald Trump is shifting that to a place where it's more of, with the exception of Israel, wars where they need to happen, not whatever war we can get our hands on, like Dick Cheney would have done, which he did do.
Dick Cheney was a warmonger. I think that Trump is just careless and completely lacks in foresight. And I do just want to talk a little bit more, and I do want to talk about 2024, but I just want to think about the 2016 election and a little bit about Trump's first term, because a lot of people say, everyone says that Trump is the end of the world, but things were not that bad. In many ways, things were better. I would argue that, the pandemic, just as Trump was ending his time in office. So the fact that, inflation, which was a result of COVID subsidies, is not Biden's fault. But anyway, Trump came in on a message that really tapped into, I think, a lot of Americans feeling that things were moving too quickly, that the America that they know and love was disappearing before their eyes, and this message of "Make America Great Again," which was not a message that Romney or McCain or George Bush was peddling, really resonated with people, and that is how he kind of rose to power. But his first term was, I think, defined less by the things that he did than by the things that he didn't do. There were all kinds of things that Trump, and we know this from reporting that has come out since he exited the White House. There were so many things that Trump wanted to do that he didn't do because the people around him prevented it from happening, right? And so you say that Trump is anti-war. I think Trump would have started several wars if he had been allowed to by the people around him. Trump wanted to shoot missiles at Mexico. He wanted to target drug labs in Mexico, and he said, let's just shoot missiles at them. And the people around him recognized, well, guess what? That's going to start a war with Mexico, right? Not that it would be a war Mexico could win, but you simply can't tolerate that.
The 51st state.
Yeah, but as a sovereign nation, you can't really let that happen without answering it. So it's the kind of thing that Trump wanted to do in his first term and couldn't do. And I just think that the way that the Republican Party used to resist him so much and no longer does, that the people around him, the people who would become the most powerful people in the country, his attorney general and his the top generals that he would appoint, his defense minister, like these are the most powerful people in the most powerful country in the world, and they are all going to facilitate whatever Trump wants to do. So I just think it's really scary to think about the kind of presidency that a second Trump term would look like, and I'm very, very nervous about that.
So I mean, you could entirely be right, but it's also a possibility that he's just spitballing, and in some cases spitballing ended up working out well for him. When he came in and in many ways resolved international conflicts in the Middle East with the Abraham Accords. Yeah, not all him, I understand. But when he came in, people were saying, like, it's impossible to solve that issue. Like, it's not going to happen. He threw shit at the wall, and then eventually they came to something that ended up working out. I mean, unless you consider the fact that that's one of the reasons that October 7th happened, but that's not the point. The whole shooting missiles into Mexico, is that something he was serious about doing? We don't know. He's a man who speaks off the cuff and doesn't always say what he believes and doesn't always believe what he says. And that's a difficult thing to evaluate a person like that, which actually makes him an interesting player on the international field, because you never know what he's going to do. And when you're allies of that leader, that's a very scary thing. And that's not good. But when you're the enemy of that leader, that's a very scary thing. And that can be a good thing. Russia was fairly contained. They're fairly tame during that time. There was an invasion of Ukraine down in Crimea in 2014 under Barack Obama. And then in 2022 under Joe Biden. Nothing during Donald Trump's term. Apparently there was a phone call, I think it was a phone call, where they had said they were going to do some things, and he basically said that he was going to nuke them. I think it was that. I can't exactly remember. And they said, well, you're not going to do that. And he said, I might. And so he's a wild man, and that's not necessarily a good thing, but it can be a good thing. So that's the best defense I can have on that, because, again, I'm not someone who's a fervent supporter of him. I'm just doing my best.
Yeah, I don't know about that. To have a man who you describe as a wild card, who has the launch codes to the most powerful set of nuclear in the world, is a scary thing, right? And someone who you say, oh, he's unpredictable, you can't mess with him because you never know what he's going to do. It's like, okay, the flip side of that coin is that he might literally start like a nuclear holocaust. And I know that's a crazy thing to say, and I don't believe that he would do that, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. He is so unhinged, and again, I'm just the man that he is, the type of man that we know he is, right? We have all the information that we need. We have had 9 years of Trump in the spotlight, in our faces all the time. So many books have been written about Trump. So many news articles have been written about him. People who've spent lots and lots and lots of time with him. People who understand how he governs, what kind of president he was. We know all this now, right? And it's just like, with all that information that we have about Trump, the fact that 50% is willing to put him back in office just is baffling to me. And I understand why. I understand a lot of these people are economic voters, people who just feel like things were better under Trump, people who feel like the border is out of control, people who feel like he's not a politician, he's one of us, people who feel like that Washington is a swamp and that it needs to be drained. Like I understand all those things. I feel like better than I ever have why people vote for Trump. But I just feel as though when you look at everything together, he is so unqualified for this job, and I'm really scared what a presidency would look like. I gotta admit, like, and maybe I shouldn't, but I'm also kind of curious.
You want to see it happen, don't you?
Well, he is such a unique figure in history, and people, if he wins, will be talking about Trump like in the year 2100, right? Like he is going to be one of those presidents, whether he wins or not, right? Like he has redefined the Republican Party, and when he's gone, it doesn't mean everything just reverts back to the way it was, right? It is fundamentally changed, and he is the reason for that. So he is a unique historian, and while I think that the democratic institutions that have served America for the last 250 years are risk due to the way that he seeks to govern like a fascist, like a dictator. I think that while that terrifies me, I am also curious to see history unfold before my eyes, right? And that's what would happen with a second Trump term.
Well, we can't predict the future, but if it happens, and that doesn't happen in 4 years, I can't wait to hear the "I told you so"s. And if it does happen, then we won't be around here. The "I told you so"s. So. No, but it's pretty normal. The shifting of the party towards Donald Trump is actually not that surprising because parties typically shift about every 20 years. The Democratic Party of today is not the Democratic Party of 2000. They're very different. The Democratic Party of 2000 is not the Democratic Party of the 1980s. And by the time the 2050s roll around, the Republican Party won't be the party of Trump anymore. So it's an era, but it's not like going forward. It's
true, but one affects the other. Like
100%.
We have now taken a fork in the road where we can't go back to this point, right? We're only going to move from here. So I agree with you, and I'm not saying that things stop. Nothing stops, especially not in an era that moves as quickly as ours does, right? With evolving technology, things are moving faster than ever. Globalization just has accelerated the speed at which we evolve as a society. So I agree with you 100% that the Republican Party of 10 years from now will be very different from the one that we see today, but it will be affected by the things that are happening right now. Right, and that's a fact that we cannot ever go back. Right, there's no putting the Trump back in the bottle.
Yeah, but I don't even know if we want to, because I think that if you have the right corrective mechanisms, which is the point of free speech, when a mistake is made, you can address it, and there is a corrective factor. When you sweep something under the rug, like the disdain and anger that the American blue-collar class had in 2016, if you just, as I said, swept it under the rug, it could boil over in a much worse way than it did. Like, Trump is one thing, it could be a lot worse. And I know people have a hard time imagining that right now, and people on the left, but it can. It 100% can. And so if these corrective measures are effective, then I think by the end of this era that we're talking, and by the time my son is able to vote, then I think that the Republican Party will be better for it. At least in my opinion, I hope so. I hope they continue to stay in a fairly anti-war party, because I think that is better for the world. I think every time the United States gets involved in a war that is not a righteous war, it has negative repercussions on the United States. The only one that I can think of that was not necessarily, and you can make arguments that it is a righteous war, that I can think of that did have a positive outcome, is the Korean War. I don't know if the Korean War was a righteous war or not. I'm not studied enough as it is, but to me it's possible it's one, it could have been Vietnam. Interestingly enough, Vietnam is, I think, the only conflict that enemy of the Americans has come around to being their ally since 2000, since World War II. Every other conflict that the Americans have gotten themselves into, they've only made more of an enemy out of their opponents.
Yeah, well, like you mean like Japan and Germany are now allies in a way that they were obviously not during World War II.
Yeah, exactly. But after World War II, that hasn't, other than like South Korea became their ally, but then when they went in, like if you compare Vietnam to Afghanistan and Iraq, these people in large margin hate America now. But Vietnam is different. They went into Vietnam, they killed a bunch of people. Whether or not you can argue it's justified, I don't think it's justified at all, considering the reason that they went was an actual false flag that was orchestrated by the Americans. They have come around to being allies, not necessarily allies, but friendly with the United States. If you look at Afghanistan, that's not the case. The governing body of Afghanistan is vehemently anti-United States.
Anyway, just bringing it back to the point of the Republican Party and war. I actually find it interesting that in many ways the Republican Party has become anti-war because they have become so isolationist, right? I think that the idea among many Republicans now is America first, right? Why are we spending money abroad when we could be spending it here, right? Why do we have such high taxes when our taxes are going to funding Ukraine and now funding Israel? And it's like, why are we spending all that money when in fact we got a lot of problems here that we need to address? Again, many people feel like the southern border is completely out of control. Why are we not focusing more on that? And so I think that the reason that the Republican Party has become less and less inclined towards war is not because of some moral awakening where they realized that they're all pacifists. I think it's just a question of where do we want to spend our money.
Well, it's definitely a little bit of both.
America, who really since World War II has stood as the world's police force, the beacon of democracy. This idea, the leader of NATO, and really the champion of democracy, where they are not only protecting other democracies but trying to create new democracies. Essentially, it is the Cold War continued, and I just think that the Republicans are starting to say, that's a lot of investment in things that do not benefit America. Now, do I agree with that? Of course not. I think that America should continue to defend its allies, like Ukraine. We have different opinions on Ukraine, but I think that you absolutely support a sovereign nation who has been invaded by another nation, because what happens if America doesn't intervene, right? What happens if other European countries don't intervene? Oh, yeah, go for it, Putin. You can invade whoever you want, whenever you want, and that's fine. Well, then what? Chaos. So I frankly disagree with that perspective, but it is a perspective that's becoming more and more popular, which is America first.
Yeah, well, I the way that I see it is that if you should take care of your own household before you start telling other people how to live their lives. And when America is in shambles the way that it is, hundreds of thousands of people dying every year of overdoses, their health outcomes are far worse than most first world countries at this point. When you are a shining city on the hill, people can look up to you, and when you make an argument as to why not to do something, or you go in with a military force, people look at you and go, "Oh, no, that was clearly with good intentions." But when you are clearly rotting from the inside, you could say, I don't think that's the best way for me to phrase that, but you could say, people will look at those behaviors and they won't necessarily see that. One of the things that Putin argued when they wanted him to get rid of nuclear weapons was, he said, he pointed to what happened to, I think it was Saddam Hussein, when he got rid of his nuclear weapons. It didn't go well for him. I think it was that situation. I can't remember if I'm exactly correct about that. I think America definitely needs to, and any country needs to focus on its citizens first, and then once it is doing well enough, then it can focus outwardly on the rest of the world. As a united people, as NATO, of course we should back each other up. That's what NATO is about. So it's not like we should go back on that promise. No, every NATO country has made an agreement. We were going to defend each other, and that's the way that it is. As soon as a NATO country gets invaded, they're all going to war. Now, unfortunately for Ukraine is not a NATO country, so there is no agreement on anyone's part that if something happens to NATO, if something happens to Ukraine, that we will defend them. And unfortunately for them, their closest military allegiance was Russia, and that's the exact people who got invaded by them. It's a pretty shitty situation for them to be in, especially considering they were trying to get into NATO. And partially one of the reasons that Russia says why they invaded the Ukraine was because they felt like NATO was encroaching on their border, which it absolutely has been. It's been pushing east continually since its inception, even though they explicitly said that they wouldn't move an inch east. It's never stopped moving east. And when the Soviet Union tried to install nuclear weapons anywhere near the United States threatened to go to nuclear war. And so it's a completely fair reaction that when your enemies start encroaching on your territory, that you lash out. Unfortunately, the people of the Ukraine are the ones who are caught in the crossfire. It's a really shitty situation for them to be in.
Yeah, well, you know what? Russia should have been better allies to Ukraine.
100%.
Push them away, duh. And I don't see any argument to defend Russia. I also disagree with your point about all countries should get their own country all set before they worry about the rest of the world. There are always going to be problems in any country, right? And how are you to decide when things are all set? That doesn't exist, right? When things are fine. And quite frankly, we live in a very globalized, interconnected world, and you can't ignore the world, right? Even if you want. So this idea of let's just turn a blind eye when all kinds of human rights violations are happening throughout the world, no. The whole point of power, which the United States has quite a lot of, should be to uplift people with less than yourself. Yes, Americans are facing a rough time, and yes, a lot more could be done to help Americans through this hard time. Not arguing with that, but I just don't think that means that you should turn a blind eye to the rest of the world when you do have the power to do something. And let's not forget that America retains the by far largest military in the world, right? So you the reason that they do that, the reason that the military industrial complex in the United States is powerful, is because they actually rely on foreign wars for this 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 industrial complex to exist, right? So it's a very difficult conversation, but quite frankly, I just really don't think that you can ever turn a blind eye when you are a country as big and powerful as the United States.
Well, that's not. I mean, I may not have expressed it as well as I intend to. I'm not the most eloquent person. I don't think a country needs to have no problems before, but when the United States was the country that was most looked up to in the world, it was, for a large portion of that time, many, many, many years, a country that didn't offer the same rights to some of its people as other of its people, and yet it was still looked upon with awe by many, many other peoples around the world. So it's not that you can't have no problems, but you do have to have your house in order to a certain degree before you can help other people. If your house is on fire, you can't help your neighbor. If when an oxygen mask comes down an airplane, you have to put your own on before you put one on to another person.
Why?
Well, if you pass out while you're trying to help the other person, then you could both die. Like 2.5 seconds of not having oxygen for the person next to you is not going to kill them. But if you pass out, because they would pass out and then they would, but if you then pass out and then they can't put their oxygen mask on, then both of you will suffocate and die. So you put your own on, and it doesn't matter if it's your own child. You put your own on first, and then you put theirs on. That's the way that it is, because you have to save yourself first. You have to make sure that your house is in order before you can criticize other people. Otherwise, they'll call you a hypocrite.
That's a crisis situation.
And the world's not in a crisis situation now?
Well, I would say that America is dealing with certain crises, but that it is itself, I would not call it in crisis, no.
You're the one who thinks that its democracy is in danger. How is that not a crisis?
I think that if Donald Trump gets elected, they're going to go into crisis mode for sure. But I don't think that Joe Biden's presidency has been a crisis.
So millions of people coming across the border, hundreds of thousands of opioid overdoses, not just overdoses, but people getting hooked on these drugs. You don't think that that's a crisis? You don't think the over-medical... You don't think all of the horrible things that are put into their food that are causing long-term damage to these people because they have terrible regulation agencies that allow it, you don't think that that's a crisis?
Okay. I think that those things are crises. Does that mean that America as a whole is in crisis? That I think that those are two different things, right? Like, there is an opioid crisis. There is a housing crisis. In many cases, there is a healthcare crisis. I don't disagree with that. But is America, have they gone, is there a civil war happening right now? Is there a life-threatening disease that is rampaging through the United States that is killing, like, is the Spanish flu rampaging through? That's what I think of as maybe a true exaggerated crisis. Are we, at nuclear war with Russia? Like, that's
pretty close.
Maybe there are different scales. And look, don't get me started on just talking about how fundamentally capitalism has really, like, just eroded at people's sense of self and community. So that's a whole other discussion that obviously we're not going to have right now.
Yeah, because we disagree heavily on that.
Yeah, and that's fine. But I just think that when we're talking about crisis, there are examples throughout the world of what a real crisis looks like, and I don't think that the United States necessarily is in such a point where they cannot look outward, which is kind of bringing us back to the original discussion. I also do think we should move on to another topic, but just my point is that America is not in a place where it cannot continue to play a major role on the world stage.
No, and I agree with you that they should still play a role on the world stage, but I think they shouldn't be acting as unilaterally. I think that if you're going to have, say, A lot of people are talking about attacking Iran, and if something like that is going to happen in the way that the Allies attacked Germany, it has to be a unified West that does it together. Otherwise, it looks like the bully on the playground picking on someone else. And yeah, I think Iran is terrible, and I wouldn't want to be part of that society. But if the United States does it without broad consensus, then it doesn't look good for them. They need the West unified together, and yes, that's the case of what's going on in Ukraine, which is why that makes it a harder decision, a harder question to ponder than others.
Fair enough.
Like going into Iraq.
Yeah. What would you say are the Republican Party's strongest argument elected in 2024?
So, the two things that I think that people are most likely going to cast their ballot for the Republicans, besides blatant partisanship, which is always going to be the largest portion of it, is the economy and the state of the immigration.
Yeah, agreed.
So currently the economy is improving from what it was a couple years ago, but it's still not great. It could be a lot better. And last time we talked about how you think that, on paper you said it is doing well. But what I said was that if the people don't feel that it is doing well, is it really doing well?
Yeah.
And that's the way that I see it. If the average voter feels like the economy is not doing well, is the economy doing well?
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just people who are upper middle class and up who are gaining in wealth. And in terms of the immigration crisis, you have a fairly porous southern border with nationals from many, many different countries. It's not just South Americans at this point, South and Central Americans. You have people from the Middle East who are sneaking in because many countries in South America have very lax laws with regards to who comes and goes, and so lots of people have been flying to South American countries. I think Nicaragua is a major one. I could be wrong. I apologize, Nicaragua, if I'm wrong about that. And then making the trek up. As I said, some of them have been Middle Eastern people, and I have nothing against Arab people or Muslim people in general, but some of them are known terrorists. And there's also a large influx of Chinese military-aged men. And if you know anything about China, you don't leave China if China doesn't want you to leave. Whether that is because you're a scientist going to a university somewhere. So the fact that there's entire encampments of Chinese military-aged men who are making their way through the southern border, that some people could classify that as an invasion. And if you're the kind of person who thinks of the immigration crisis as a major problem, there's obviously only one candidate that you can vote for. There's several other cultural issues that I think play margins, but I think those are the two major ones.
Yeah. I agree with you 100%. I think that there are a lot of people who maybe dislike Trump, who maybe dislike his character, dislike what happened on January 6th. But ultimately, their first priority is themselves and, their family. I get that. And they think that, Trump is the guy who is going to, cut taxes, or he's going to bring back jobs in my community, jobs that maybe have disappeared, gone overseas, been automated. Maybe he's the guy who is going to help me with these issues. So in that sense, I agree with you, though I don't think that he's going to deliver in the way that he says he is. On immigration, and I find immigration so interesting because the issue has really pushed Democrats to the right. if you look at the 2019-2020 Democratic primary, right, where you had Biden running against all these other Democrats who aspired to be the nominee, the conversation around immigration was so different, right? Because they were coming off of 4 years of Trump's very harsh immigration policies, where, yes, it was low, but, you also had kids in cages, right? Like that was a pretty brutal way to deal with it. And I kind of get that you do have to control your border, but I also think that you can do it with humanity. And again, this is something that I said last time, try to really address the root causes of why people are immigrating in high numbers. So that's a whole conversation. I will kind of point out two things, and I think that the two answers that the Biden-Harris, Harris-Walz had, Biden-Harris administration is just kind of what I was going to say, because they have actually enacted they've reduced asylum claims, the ability to claim asylum in the United States. It's basically no longer existent. And as a result, immigration has actually really slowed, because that was a strategy that a lot of people used, was they would pass illegally into the United States and then claim asylum. And now apparently you can't do that. So that has drastically cut the numbers. But by now the narrative has set in, right? Where the Democrats are weak on the border, and, Kamala was, assigned the border as her first project as vice president, and she has failed. So they're probably the right things to do, from a Republican perspective.
Yeah, and so what you said is 100% true during the 2019 primary, 2019 into 2020 primary, but that's very, very common. Typically, the country moves to the opposite direction of whoever is in power. So currently Joe Biden is in power, so the country has more shifted to the right. But when Donald Trump was in power, the entire country, not everyone obviously, but on average, had shifted to the left. That's why the narrative of immigration within the Democratic Party was, no, we want more immigration, we want legal, illegal, doesn't matter, we want more of it, we like immigration, and immigration, if done well, is a good thing for our country.
The 2018 midterms, right after Trump was elected in 2016, saw the most progressive congressmen and women elected ever, right? Yeah. To both the Senate and the House. And it is crazy that, to your point, things really do swing. And that's kind of how democracy works,
it's
right?
A pendulum.
We're constantly trying to find the right balance, and a country evolves as it kind of does this kind of rocking motion, this pendulum, which is how progress works. But right now we are in a moment where the country has moved very much to the right on immigration, and you can see Kamala taking a very hard stance. And I move in a lot of left circles, and I see a lot of criticism of Kamala, who is, for example, campaigning with Liz Cheney, right? And who is being very tough on the border, who in many ways is, much further to the right than Joe Biden was when he was campaigning. And yet I understand that in this moment, the most important thing is defeating Donald Trump, right? And I know that people will disagree with me on that and saying the most important thing is staying true to your values. But I don't agree with that right now. Like, I just think Trump is too dangerous. And the fact that I think his very existence is going to motivate progressive voters to come out for Kamala means she does not need to spend a ton of time on the progressive issues. And again, I wish it were otherwise. I wish we could talk more about climate. I wish she could come out hard against things like fracking. But guess what? You come out against fracking, you lose Pennsylvania. You lose Pennsylvania, you lose the election. So sorry. Let's be pragmatic here, and hopefully there is a solution that she can find when she is president. But you just cannot do anything that's going to cost you a state as important as Pennsylvania. So get it, and frankly, I support it.
Yeah, and I understand. I think the reason that she's bringing out Liz Cheney is because she's trying to attract the largest voting demographic in the United States, which is white women, and that's the demographic that is the most uncomfortable. Well, women are the demographic that are most uncomfortable with Donald Trump by far, and white women being the largest section of voters in the country, you appeal to them with some female characters in politics, even though I think they're terrible people like Liz Cheney. That's one of the reasons they're attempting that. And yeah, they're saying she's a moderate. I don't think people that endorse torture, to not use any euphemisms, are moderates personally. What was I going to say? It's not all that surprising though that her swing to the right with regards to immigration has happened on many ideas. A lot of the things that she's proposed in the past, she's backed away from, because when you're running in a general election, you have to swing to the center. You try and pick up the independents, which is what she's trying to do. But you can alienate the progressives. I know you said that they're going to be driven out to vote, but some people will be driven out to vote for other people. Jill Stein's. I think it's Jill Stein running currently.
Yeah.
The Green Party. Yeah. If you look at the Arab American population, I think it's in Michigan. Is it Michigan?
Right.
Yeah. A large portion of them just refuse to vote for Kamala because she supports the same policies as Joe Biden with regards to Israel and the Middle East. And while they're not going to vote for Donald Trump because he basically has the same plus on those policies, on those topics, they will vote for a third party. And so you can lose people by swinging too much to the center. So, and by bringing in the wrong people. I think a lot of people are turned off by people like Liz Cheney and praising Dick Cheney, that it might bring in some people, but it's also gonna lose some people, because some people have anti-war values. There's left-leaning libertarians who are anti-war who would be less likely to vote for her because she's been more hawkish on many war-type topics.
Yeah. I just think that's less true when Donald Trump is the alternative, right? I think that the Harris campaign is operating under the theory that fear of Donald Trump is going to turn these people out, right? It's not the fear of the other side winning, right? It's not the fear of it's the fear of Trump winning. And that in and of itself is going to be a strong motivator for people to come out. These same people recognize that to vote for a third-party candidate, whether it be Jill Stein or Cornel West or any other candidate, is in many ways a vote for Trump, right? Like here in Canada, a lot of the Liberals' strategy oftentimes is they say a vote for the NDP is a vote for the Conservatives, right? Because you're not helping us defeat them, and that's strategic voting. I have often spoken against strategic voting, where I think that people should vote their conscience, but there are also pretty strong arguments for voting against someone. And I think that the theory that the Harris campaign is going on is that people are going to show up to vote against Trump, and that the people that they need to win to ensure that they actually get the 270 electoral seats is by getting the shy Kamala voter, right? The Republican women who maybe are not Democrats, who are very Democrat in many ways, but who are very turned off by Trump and who think that Trump simply cannot be allowed to win. And so Liz Cheney is there to tell them, come out and vote for Kamala. You don't need to tell anyone, but you need to do this because Trump cannot be allowed. And that's how the Democratic Party has won, or at least overperformed in every election since 2016. And I'm not sure if I've already said this on this podcast or whether it was on a podcast that got deleted. Wink, wink. But 2018, the Democrats crushed it. They took back the House and the Senate. Is that right? No, they didn't take back the Senate, but they took back the House in large numbers. 2020, they took the presidency, and then 2022, when they should have lost by pretty wide margins, they actually held on to the Senate and only lost Congress the House by a few seats. So Donald Trump has thus far, since 2016, proven to be a losing strategy. And I really wonder what will happen if Trump does in fact lose again. And, it'll be very messy, and Trump will claim that he won. And who knows what will happen. I think that there will be violence 1,000% between November and January. But if, when the dust settles, Kamala is the president, I wonder whether the Republican Party will realize that they have made critical error in entrusting Trump with their party and trusting him to win, because he will have lost consistently since then, and maybe they pivot to a whole different strategy. So,
yeah, and in large margins, I think you're right. I think there's going to be violence no matter what, unfortunately, no matter who wins. A lot of people don't like to. A lot of people don't even know that when Donald Trump was inaugurated, it might have been beforehand, that there was violence in Washington D.C. It wasn't January 6th, but there was violence. So it's going to happen. And if they do move away from Donald Trump, what?
There was some unrest, but there was not.
There was violence. But
Anyway.
I want them to move away from Donald Trump, because as the best argument against him is not necessarily his ideas. His ideas have debatability to them, but his character is what weighs him down. That's the thing that people say he's not fit for office for. It's not the fact that he wants tariffs. It's not the fact that he wants to close the border. It's not the fact that he, doesn't want children to be indoctrinated in gender ideology. It's not that he, there's certain things that are more extreme than others in terms of his political opinions. But for the most part, it's his character that people have opposed. So I would like if the Republican Party actually changed less than more once they drop him as the figurehead, because I think a lot of the moves that they've made are actually the right moves. It's the policies that he ran on in 2016 is what won him the election, and his character is what has dragged it down ever since, in my opinion.
Yeah, I super agree with that. And I know I kind of ranted about it a little bit, but just the fact that this is a man who literally is such a narcissist, who is so petty, who is so unable to admit defeat, who seems like a child in so many ways. Like, when you watch that debate that he and Harris had, it was a child up there. It was a 78-year-old child throwing a tantrum, and I couldn't believe how easy he was to manipulate. And I thought that Harris did a really good job in highlighting all the different ways that Trump is absolutely unfit for office. And I think that the first one is the fact that he has no respect for democratic institutions, right? He does not care. He is, in fact, anti-democrat, where it's all about him, right? I want to be in office, and I want to do what I want. I don't actually care about making America better. I don't actually care about. I don't believe he cares at all. The Republican Party, the presidency, these are all just things that he uses as ways to advance his own agenda, his own power, his own ego, and it's just unbelievable that people are willing to put this guy back in office. So I'm really worried. Again, curious, but in a huge majority of me is very worried about what a second Trump presidency would look like. I think that it really coin toss at this point, and I'm going to be watching the results, glued to the TV and really just praying that this guy does not come into power, because I really do think that as flawed as it is, democracy is the best form of government that we've got, and it needs to be protected instead of attacked in the way that Trump has attacked it. And that's what he will do, completely enabled by the people around him, having learned lessons from the first time around. The first time was just a warm-up, dude. And now it's really going to be full throttle for this second term. So please let him lose.
I tend to disagree with you about two things. I'll start with the first one. I have a toddler. I know what a temper tantrum looks like. That was just petty reactionariness, not a temper tantrum. But I do think that he does care about the people. I do, but I think it's in service. It's in service of, when. Not that I think this of him, but a lot of mythology about gods, once they lose the praise and admiration of their people, they lose their power. And he needs the people to love him, and therefore he needs to service them as well. And so I do think that he wants to do right by the people that vote for him, not necessarily the people who vote against him.
For his own ends.
Sure, but most people are selfish people. And I know people don't like to admit that, but even most people's selflessness is in service of their own gain. My father has spent his entire career helping other people grow in their field. He's a university professor, and he has more his name is on more papers in his field than anyone else in his department. And it's all because he helps other people. He doesn't do it for money. He doesn't do it necessarily for prestige, but because of that, he is internationally known. You could go to most countries in the world that have, well, I guess most countries in the world probably do have geology departments, and talk about my father, and they would likely know who he is, because so many people from China, Iran, Egypt, so many countries you can name, he's been to or had students from or helped people write papers, fix their English in their papers. And that's not necessarily on purpose, I imagine. He doesn't do it. He does it because he cares. But most people in some way act that way. You are nice to your friends because then you don't have friends, and then you don't have, once you lose your social circle, you really have nothing. People who don't have social circles go insane. A lot of people describe drug addiction not as an addiction to drugs, but a lack of connections. And yeah, anyway, that's the end of that rant.
Don't think that any of that applies to Donald Trump, right? He does not try to uplift those around him. In fact, he pushes everyone down. He's the guy, when you're drowning, who is going to push you under to keep himself up above water, right? Your father has risen to prominence by helping others. And I'm not saying that there aren't multiple ways to rise to prominence. There are. Trump's way is the opposite way of your father, right? Your father helps others, and in doing so gains the respect of those people, and now has the acclaim internationally that you were just talking about. Trump is not like that at all. Trump is someone who will screw you over the first chance he gets. Trump is someone who will absolutely yell at you or fire you just to stroke his own ego, right? Like, we know this because all the staffers who used to work for Trump have all come out and said it was an awful experience. He's a terrible boss. He is not someone who has any empathy for anyone else, right, who he's working with. And universally, all of them pretty much have said, I'm not going back. I don't want to go back because he's a terrible person to work for. So he is someone who, I'm sorry, is really just all about himself, is only interested in power for its own ends, right? He doesn't care about specific economic policies. He wants to do the things that he believes will give him more power, right? Which is more ego, which is more, love and adoration, because he does want that. He craves people who say that he is so great, right? That's why he has done everything that he's done to get back to the presidency, right? Is because he adores how there's this cult that follows him, right? He is essentially a cult leader, and the people who follow him love his personality and praise him on social media and to his face, and he adores that, and that's all that he really wants. So and I'm sorry, I'm getting a little heated here, but this is a man who is utterly unqualified for the presidency, and I cannot imagine what a second term would look like.
So
let's wrap it there.
Well, no, I could keep going for a long time, and I need to address this because it is impossible for an alpha to maintain power by exerting only power. If you are the biggest, strongest, most scary chimp in the chimp world, you would think that he's going to be the one in charge, but it's not possible. What happens is that they might take over, but then 2 or 3 or 4 slightly smaller chimps will come and they will tear you apart. You have to have reciprocal altruism for it to work. Trump is, yes, he screwed over many people, but he's also uplifted many people, and that is why the people around him, not necessarily his supporters, because you make arguments that but like the Republicans that he has endorsed that have risen to the Senate and Congress, he has helped those people. That's the only way that you can maintain power, is by helping others. Otherwise, why would they support him?
Doesn't help them. They have come out and said, right, the Matt Gaetzes, the Marjorie Greens, they have just gone out on the campaign trail and said Donald Trump is so amazing, and the Donald Trump's base see that and they go, oh cool, you're aligned with Trump, you're on Team Trump, cool, I'm going to vote for you. They have attached themselves to him, but do you think that he has any loyalty to them or any interest in helping them, in uplifting them? No, they're doing the same thing, where they see someone who they can attach themselves to and rise to power. But would Trump at any given moment get rid of them, push them down if it helped him? Absolutely he would. Absolutely.
Well, what you're talking about is it's a status thing. The way that he's uplifted them in many ways is just by having his name associated with them. That's all he needs to do, and people will vote more for those people because he's endorsed them. And yeah, he might screw them over at some point. They likely know that that's a possibility. That's one of the games they're playing. Again, I'm not some staunch defender of him. It's much more. I'm just saying it's much more complicated than the way that people project it. He's not just the kind of person who just screws people over. It's a far more complicated situation than that. You cannot survive at the top echelons of anything by being the one who screws everyone over at any time. No, you have to have positive relationships that help people build you up, and that you help build each other up. It's the only way to survive in any hierarchy. It's the only way. There's no primate in existence that is the top of their field by being completely selfish and screwing everyone else over. It's not a thing that exists.
I disagree. I just think that there are a lot of people around him, and all these people understand that they just need to praise him and tell him that he's great. And these are the people who he, who are his inner circle, right? Work with him. I'm not saying that he's doing it all on his own and that there's no one around him who's supporting him. I'm just saying that he doesn't care about any of those people around him, right? They're all doing it because share the same goal, and that goal is power. And they understand that they have found a formula that works, or at least might work. We'll see what happens on November 5th. But it is not because Trump wants the best for these people. I just don't think that his career has any indications whatsoever of looking to serve anyone himself. His presidency absolutely has not shown that, and his second term will not show that either.
Look, I'm not
to disagree, and I know that you do disagree, and that's okay.
No, I agree with what you said there. It's a superficial support on both sides, but there is still a level of support. So there has to be some reciprocation.
That doesn't change anything about his character.
No, I don't defend his character. I'm in agreement with you. He doesn't have a good character. He's crass, and he says things that in public are off-putting. And that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about him as a person. Is one of the things that's interesting is that a billionaire. One of the things that confuses a lot of people is that he's a billionaire, and yet he is seen as a man of the people, or a man of at least the blue-collar people. And I think the reason, this is a hypothesis that I'm playing with. This week I was talking with some of my coworkers, and they were saying some pretty all-over-the-place things about politics. Some weird left-wing things, and then some crazy right-wing things that I was just like, how do you even believe both of those things at the same time? Like, it makes no sense. And I think one of the reasons that so many people that are blue collar get along with him is because, or see themselves reflected through him, is because he is the same way. He is not an ideological person. He believes certain things, and he feels certain things, and that's how he decides how to interact with the political world. As I said, he's more left-wing on certain things than most other Republicans. He's more pro-choice than they are. Is that because of the convictions that he has? No, that's just the way that he feels. So it's when you talk about people like Mitt Romney, or you talk about people like Barack Obama, these are people who have much stricter ideologies, and I think that's one of the reasons that blue collar people are less attracted to them. Now, Barack Obama won blue collar people, I believe, but I don't think it's not the level of, they didn't see him as one of them. And it's weird that they see a billionaire who I believe literally has a gold toilet as one of them. It's a strange thing that doesn't make sense, and that's why I think something people criticize him a lot for is that he speaks on a 4th grade reading level. Go look at what the average reading age is in the United States. He's talking to the people, and that's one of the reasons they resonate with him. And as I've said, I don't like his character, but that's why people are willing to vote for him, because he's one of them in their eyes. And people like in-groups. They don't like out-groups. And they see the elites. They see people who speak with eloquence, and the people who wear, $1,000 jewelry, and Trump does some of that with the suits and watches and stuff. But a lot of those people, like Mitt Romney, they're not seen as one of them. They're seen as an out-group, and they see the blue-collar people, on average, see Trump as in-group, and in-group preference is one of the strongest instincts that we have as humans. So that's one of the reasons that I think that they are so on his side, despite many of his character flaws. A lot of them don't even care about a lot of his policies. If you were to ask a lot of Trump supporters, they think and believe many different things about how the country should be run than he does. But it's an in-group, out-group mentality. He's blue-collar, even though he's not.
Yeah, he's not a politician.
Exactly. But it's not just he's not a politician. Lots of people are not politicians who've come in, and people don't feel the same way about. You know, Andrew Yang, I love Andrew Yang. He's great. I wish that he'd been the one to run against Donald Trump. I think he would have creamed Donald Trump more than Joe Biden did in that election, personally. But he was a millionaire, and he was not, even though he had more working class vibes than some of the other people on that stage. Same thing with Vivek Ramaswamy. I also like Vivek Ramaswamy. But he is not a blue-collar person, and so they don't like him as much as they like Donald Trump. There's lots of people who they might agree with, who they aren't one of them. And technically Donald Trump's not one of them, but he feels like one of them, and so they think that.
I think that's a good place to close. We will see what happens on November 5th.
Yes, we will. Next month's episode, we are going to be recapping what happened on November 5th. We likely won't know the actual results probably till November 17th, probably, or 19th.
Probably take a week.
Yeah. So, until next time, thanks for stopping by.
Thanks for stopping by.
That's my line. Damn you. Hello, everyone. Kieran here. Nick and I really weren't that happy with how this recording went. We were much happier with the previous recording that we had done, the one that my audio was lost on. So I'm going to try and get subtitles put on over where my speaking portions are, and then re-release that to everyone as a supplementary to this episode. Thank you for your time, and enjoy the video.